The year was 1945. The smoke was finally clearing from the battlefields of World War II, and the world was in ruins. Europe was shattered, its cities reduced to rubble, and its economies decimated. In stark contrast, the United States emerged entirely untouched by the devastation on its own soil. It stood tall as the undisputed economic and military heavyweight of the entire world. However, having unparalleled strength is not exactly the same thing as being a global hegemon. At that moment in time, the United States still had not established a comprehensive, worldwide system of absolute dominance. It would take a carefully calculated, interconnected series of maneuvers over the next 46 years to achieve that ultimate goal. Through a highly strategic, five-step layout, the United States ascended to become the sole unmatched superpower on the planet. Let us explore the very first step of this monumental journey, building the unbreakable foundation of financial supremacy. The stage was set in July 1944. Even before the war had officially ended, 732 delegates, representing 44 different nations, gathered in the quiet town of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. They were there to figure out the rules for the post-war global economy. Because the United States held over 70% of the world's official gold reserves, it held all the core bargaining chips. The rules they finalized were completely in their favor. They established a system where every currency in the world was tied to the US dollar. And the dollar was, in turn, tied to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. At the same time, institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were officially born, with their headquarters firmly planted on American soil, and their core decision-making power directed by Washington. Even when the dollar was decoupled from gold, in 1971, the system did not collapse. By 1974, a brand new agreement was forged with Saudi Arabia, creating the petrodollar system. Oil, the lifeblood of modern industry, could only be purchased using US dollars. The United States simply had to turn on its printing presses, and it could exchange paper notes for tangible resources and goods from any country. But a currency needs a flourishing market to circulate. This leads us to the second step, inserting the dollar directly into the economic bloodstream of Europe through the Marshall Plan. Officially known as the European Recovery Program, it was labeled as the largest humanitarian aid initiative in human history. Yet, beneath the surface of this generosity was a brilliantly designed economic strategy. When European nations received these massive funds, there were strict conditions. They were required to prioritize purchasing American industrial equipment and commodities. This meant the money essentially flowed right back into the United States. Furthermore, they had to lower trade tariffs and completely open their domestic markets to American businesses. On the surface, it was about rebuilding a broken continent. In reality, it thoroughly and permanently bound the economies of Western Europe to the United States. Financial and economic control, however, is fragile without a sword to protect it. This brings us to the third step, constructing a massive overarching global military network. In 1949, the United States spearheaded the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which successfully tied 12 initial nations into a single, unified military framework. This laid the absolute core foundation for Cold War military strategy. Even after the Cold War ended, this alliance did not shrink. It continuously expanded eastward, growing to 32 member states today. But this was only the beginning. Fast forward to recent years, and the United States operates over 750 military facilities across more than 80 countries and territories. This massive footprint includes nearly 400 major active duty bases. There are over 100 bases in Japan alone, and dozens more scattered across Germany and South Korea. Keeping over 170,000 troops stationed overseas costs astronomical sums every single year. These bases are not merely there to protect allies or promote regional peace. They function as strategic outposts, securing lucrative trade routes and providing direct deterrence against anyone who might dare to challenge the established rules of American hegemony. With the economy and military secured, the fourth step was about eliminating the only rival capable of resisting this system, the Soviet Union. The Cold War was not a traditional battlefield. It was a grueling, protracted standoff involving nuclear deterrence, ideological warfare, and devastating proxy conflicts scattered across the globe. It was a brutal contest of endurance that lasted for nearly half a century. The United States relied on its incredibly resilient economic engine and a unified, wealthy circle of allies to maintain strategic initiative. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, became dangerously over-reliant on energy exports and massive military spending, while suffering from systemic stagnation. By the 1980s, structural cracks were undeniably visible. Reforms, introduced in 1985, only accelerated the collapse of a system that was already failing. Then, the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, shortly after the Warsaw Pact dissolved. Finally, in late December 1991, the Soviet Union completely ceased to exist. 15 independent nations emerged from its ashes. The United States won the Cold War, successfully removing its absolute biggest competitor from the board, cementing its status as the singular superpower. Yet true dominance requires something far more subtle than guns and money. The fifth and final step is the global infiltration of culture and technology, a soft power approach that is incredibly deceiving and highly concealed. The foundation of this cultural spread relies heavily on Hollywood. It is not just the world's largest film industry. It is a masterclass in silent influence. By exporting movies that champion individualism and the American dream, they shape the values of audiences worldwide, without them even realizing it. Year after year, American cinema holds an overwhelming majority of the global distribution market. Alongside culture came the unstoppable rise of the digital age. Silicon Valley became the unquestioned epicenter of global technological innovation. A significant majority of the world's top 10 most valuable technology companies, including giants like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Alphabet, are American. They control vast networks of cloud computing infrastructure and the very core servers of the Internet itself, which originally evolved from a Defense Department project. Through movies and smart devices, the United States dictates the daily routines, thoughts, and future technologies of people across the planet. This 46-year masterplan proves that the American empire operates differently from the empires of old. Rome conquered with legions. Britain expanded with armadas. The United States built an interlocking system of financial, military, cultural, and technological rules. It does not need to physically occupy every nation. It merely needs to weave itself into the fabric of their economies and daily lives. Today, while still standing as an unmatched powerhouse, this intricate system faces entirely new trials. The global landscape is shifting toward multipolarity. Emerging economies are rising, regional trade alliances are strengthening, and the steady push toward de-dollarization is challenging the core financial order. For the very first time since 1945, the United States is navigating a world that it can no longer entirely dictate on its own terms. The real question moving forward is not whether American power will vanish overnight, but whether it can adapt and protect the complex system it spent almost half a century building. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and join us next time as we continue to uncover the thrilling hidden chapters of history.